All right, well, you've made it. We are working on the last lesson of college algebra, lesson 9.2. And what 9.2 addresses is trying to solve this system of equations that you've been working with, but dealing with systems that are much more complicated than just your two variable, two equation kind. So my expectation on this is that you have already watched the learn portion up through page 11. And at that point, you can stop and then come watch the video. So I'm going to kind of breeze over terminology stuff and assume you know that from watching the learn portion. All right, my goal here really is this can get pretty complex. And so I want you to understand is what really is our expectation. How much of this, how in depth is this going to be for you? All right, so let's start off with this. All right, so I've got a system of equations. I have three variables. I have a x, a y, and a z. I have three equations. And I can solve this system because it has three variables, but because I have three equations, I can do it. Now, this particular system is a mess. And so your first job here is to clean it up. And so I really want it to look like an x term plus a y term plus a z term equals a constant. So each one of these, my first job is to go ahead and just clean it up. So on this first equation, I'm going to distribute my 3. So then I'm going to have a 3z minus 9. And then I'm going to have a minus 5x, a plus y, and equals z. And I'm going to do that on each one of these, just distribute. So the next one is a negative 8x plus 2y plus the 6 equals 3z. And then the last one, I'm going to kind of do 2 steps in one. Hopefully this doesn't mess with you, but you will find that there's a lot of steps in these. So if you kind of like double up your steps, that kind of helps. So I'm going to distribute this negative that I have right here. This is going to have to go through the parentheses. But in addition to that, I'm going to take it times a 2 as well. I'm going to take everything times 2. And my goal is to get rid of the fraction that I have right here. So I'm going to take that times 2 to start with. And that's going to turn into a 5x. And now I'm going to take this whole quantity times 2 also, but it's going to look like a negative 2 because of the minus that's going on. So what I'm really distributing is a negative 2 through that parentheses. So that's going to turn into a negative 2y, and then a negative 2 times a negative 7z is going to turn into a plus 14z. Equals, and I have to multiply everything times 2, the other side of the equation, to keep it balanced. And so this is what I have. All right, now this is kind of a mess. Oops. I can't really move that. Okay, I'll move it out there. All right, so this is what we have now. Still not what I want. Like I said, I want the x term, then the y term, then the z term, then the constant. So now I'm going to rearrange the 3 equations that I have and put them in that order. So when I look at this first one, you can see that the x term is sort of in the middle. Well, I'm going to pull it and bring it to the front. So this term here is going to come out to the front. This z is going to have to come over to this side. So it's going to have to subtract over, and I'll combine it with the z term that's already there. And at the same time, I'm going to take this constant and put it over here on this side. So that way I'll have the x, the y, the z equals the number. All right, so let's see if we can do that. So I'm going to put the negative 5x first. And then the plus y. And now here's the part where I'm going to subtract this z over to this side, but I'm going to subtract it from the 3z I already have. So it's going to end up a plus 2z. And then I want to move my constant to the other side of the equation, so I'm going to add 9 to both sides. And now that's really the form that I want to get this in. So let's try the next one. Same idea. We want the x term first. Okay, that's pretty easy. It's already there. And then I'm going to want the y term. It's already there. But it looks like I need to swap the z term and the constant. So I'm going to subtract the 3z and then subtract the 6 to the other side. All right, last one. Okay, let's see what we've got. We've got 2 x terms. You can see there's an x term here. It needs to be brought over with this x term. So I'm going to subtract 2x. So that'll get me a 3x. There's only one y term, so it's okay. There's only one z term. But think about this. If I subtract that 2x over here, I got nothing left. And I don't have a constant to take over there. So it's just going to equal 0. And that's okay. So subtract that 2x. Then I have the minus the 2y plus the 14z, and it's going to equal 0. So on your homework, all they're wanting you to do is to clean it up, get rid of all the parentheses, get everything in the same order, and then you just have to type it in what we call an augmented matrix, which just ditches all of the variables and just puts in the coefficients. So you'll put in a -5, a 1, a 2, a 9, -8, 2, -3, -6, 3, -2, 14, 0. And that's all they're really wanting you to do there, is just to clean it up, and then you're done. That's the first type of problem, and it kind of sets the stage for doing a more advanced type of problem and actually solving this system of 3 equations. All right, so then let's actually go through and let's solve. And I'm going to start with some 2 variable ones that are a little bit simpler, and then we'll gradually get harder. So what we're going to do with this is I'm going to start off and I'm going to put it into a augmented matrix. Now it's already in the proper form. You can see the x, then the y equals the number. So what it's going to look like when we put it into an augmented matrix is the -6. Actually, you know what? Okay, that's all right. I'll just leave it. -6. And then I'm going to have a -5 and a -37. And we separate, we kind of replace the equal sign with a bar to indicate that, hey, that's on the other side of the equation. And then you have a 1, 3, and a 4. All right, now this is your augmented matrix. 2 rows by 3 columns. And what you're going to want to do is try to get this in row echelon form. And if you'll recall, what row echelon form looks like is that you have, I'm going to make this kind of messy. You have this diagonal through here that has a coefficient of 1, and then this is a 0. Everything on that side of that diagonal through there is a 0. And then eventually we'll put it in reduced row echelon form, where we also want this to be a 0. So that's our goal. And then this stuff over here just plays out to whatever it ends up being. All right, so let's see if we can do that. Now remember that we want, I'm going to kind of adjust something here. And I was contemplated doing it originally, and you will learn to maybe do some shortcuts as you do this. But I thought, wow, look, the coefficient right there is a 1. Wouldn't it be nice if that was on top? Because then I want that very first top left spot to be a 1. So that's the very first thing I'm going to do, is I'm just going to swap these 2 rows. Remember that is one of the options. You can just swap them. So I've got a 1, 3, 4, -6, -5, -37. Now in hindsight, I would have done that right here from there to there. I would have recognized, oh, I'm just going to put that one on top and the other one on bottom. Okay, so now your next job is to figure out how to get rid of this -6. You need that to be a 0. Remember, you want these to be 1s. This needs to be a 0. So to make this a 0, you look at the other equation and you figure out, how can I get these to cancel? It kind of like, it goes back to how you did elimination. And ultimately, when you do the matrices, it is elimination, but you bypass working with all the variables and you kind of just cut to the chase and what's going on with the numbers. It works really nice when you have a lot of equations going. Again, we're starting off kind of slow. All right, so here's what I've got. This is what I'm going to do. We kind of show an arrow to show the progression, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave row 1 alone. Well, it's going to stay 1, 3, 4, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to tweak row 2 by using row 1. I'm going to take 6 times row 1 and I'm going to add it to row 2. Now, whatever I write here, the second part, that's the one that changes. Whatever I put here is just what I'm tweaking, but it stays the same as I write it. So this 1, 3, 4 is going to stay put, but row 2 is going to change based on this little formula. All right, so let's try it. I'm going to come down here. And the 1, 3, 4 is going to stay the same. And then I'm going to take 6 times row 1. 6 times 1 is 6. Add negative 6. That's a 0. Six times 3 is 18, plus a negative 5. That's a 13. Six times 4 is 24, minus 37. 24 minus 37. It's a negative 13. Now this worked out pretty nice. Look at what we're going to be able to do here. Again, remember you got a 0. That's awesome. Now I'm trying to make these be 1s. So to make this be a 1, I'm going to divide it by 13. Look how nicely that row is going to divide by 13. So I just take row 2, and I'm going to divide by 13. And then I write the progression of what happens then. The first line is going to stay the same. It does not change. But the second line, 0 divided by 13 is just going to stay 0. But 13 divided by 13 and a negative 13 divided by 13. And that's what I have. All right, we have managed to reach row echelon form. Now what we try to do is get it to reduced row echelon form, which means not only do I want this to be a 0, these to be a 1, I want this to also be a 0. So to get this to be a 0, I reference the row that has a 1 in that column. And so what I could do is I could tweak this. I could take this times negative 3 and then add it to this, and that's how it's going to turn into a 0. So I'm going to take negative 3 times row 2, and I'm going to add it to row 1. Now remember what I said earlier. This is being tweaked, but it doesn't actually change when I write it. The only row that's going to change is the second one that I write. After I add the row 1, that's what I'm replacing row 1 with. Okay, so then row 2, going to stay exactly the same. Sometimes I just write that so that I know that it's done. And now row 1 is going to turn into, let's see how this works. Negative 3 times row 2, add row 1. Well, if this is a 0, this isn't going to change anything, so it's just going to stay a 1. That's going to be a 1. Okay, here, negative 3 times row 2, so it's negative 3 plus 3. That's a 0. So what I've got then, let me go ahead and start filling in. I've got the 1, and then that's going to get me a 0. And then negative 3 times negative 1, that's a positive 3, plus 4, that's 7. There's our reduced row echelon form. And remember what this simplifies to then is that x will equal 7 and y will equal negative 1. And you would enter that as an ordered pair. All right, so that's the gist of what we're doing. And we need to get pretty good at this version. So I'm going to try one more of these. All right, so this one is a little messier looking up front. If you look at it, we've got 6s and 8s and 6s and 7s. And I know from doing elimination in lesson 9.1 that I could take this times 4 to get a 24 and this times 3 to get a 24, make one of them a negative, and I could eliminate it. Okay, so that idea is sort of what we're doing when we do this matrix in the row echelon form, except we're leaving the x and y out. However, before I even do that, I took a peek and said, hey, wait a second. All of these are divisible by 6. So I'm going to, and again, I don't want to skip too many steps because that's where the mistakes start happening when you start skipping steps. But I'm going to put this into an augmented matrix, but I'm also going to, in the very first step, I'm going to divide that by 6 and make those numbers smaller. Let's look at what that augmented matrix would do. So then I would end up with a 1x, so I put a 1, a 1y, so I put a 1, and then a 36 divided by 6 is a 6. In the bottom row, I haven't done anything. There's my augmented matrix. Now let's put it into row echelon form, where again, which means that I want this to be a 0, I want this to be a 1, and eventually I'll reduce it to where that's a 0 as well. All right, so looking at this is a 1. I like that. I want this to go to a 0. So I'm going to take this and take it times a -8 and add it to this. So we would say -8 times row 1, add it to row 2, because row 2 is the one that I want to change. Which means row 1 is not going to change. So -8 times 1 is -8 plus 8. That's a 0. That's what I wanted that to be. I want that first one to be a 0. Now let's see what happens with the others. I'm going to take a -8 times 1, so that's -8 plus 7. Okay, that's going to end up with a -1. Let's try again. -8 times 6, that's -48 plus 47 is actually a -1. All right, this came out really nice because I already almost have this to be a 1. I just, like last time I had to divide, I already forgot what I had to divide by. I think 13. I had to divide by 13. Here I'm just going to divide by a -1, and it's going to change both of those to positive ones. In fact, so much so, would you let me just shortcut it and say I'm going to divide each of those by -1, and it's going to turn this to a positive 1. And this to a positive 1. Okay, I don't always get that lucky. Okay, so now I have the augmented matrix, but I need to also make this be a 0 up here. So to make that be a 0, I'm going to do something to this one and add it to that. I want to take this times a -1 and add it to this. -1 times row 2, add it to row 1. Let's see what happens. The bottom row does not change. It's only the top row that I'm changing. So -1 times row 2. Well, row 2 is a 0, so that's not going to change anything. But this next part right here, -1 times row 2, so that's a -1 plus 1. That's going to turn to a 0. That was my goal. And then the last term, this is where the action really happens. -1 times row 2, so that's going to be a -1. Add it to a 6. That's going to get me a 5. Now I'm in reduced row echelon form. You can see that this is going to tell you that x is 5. This is going to tell you that y is equal to 1. You write it as an ordered pair, 5, 1. Once you get the hang of working with matrices, they really are pretty nice, and they're a lot faster probably. Okay, so now here's our goal. I really like matrices because they really do have some nice application. We unfortunately don't get too much into that. We're just kind of introducing you to that concept, but it's a great way to organize information. When you have a lot of variables going on, and when you read through the lesson on the learn part, it kind of talked a little bit about, to me, I think of it as logistics. If you're trying to organize a lot of info, matrices are a great way to set it up. So in this particular example, we actually have 3 variables. We have an x, a y, and a z. So what we're going to create is an augmented matrix. And on my augmented matrix, I want the first column to be x. I want the next column to be the y's, then the z's, and then the constant. And I'll put the bar there. Okay, so each one of these, you can see they don't all have an x, y, and z. And that's okay. So on this first one, it does have an x, so I'm going to put a 1, and it has the y, but it doesn't have a z, so I'll put a 0 for that. And then the number is just 0. Okay, on the next one, I don't have an x, so I put a 0 for that, but I do have the y and the z, and then the number. And then on the last one, I have all 3. I have a -2, -1, 3, and a -6. They were nice enough to put them all in the right order for us. This right here is the augmented matrix. If that's all they want, you get to stop. But it's not going to be all they want. So now what we have to do, it's actually set up so nice already because they have the first row has the 1. I like it. The second row has the 0 and then the 1. I like it. That's nice. It's really just this row 3 that I've got to fix. And I want it to look like, remember, this has to be all 1s. These are going to be 0s, and eventually these are going to be 0s. But these have to be 1s. I need to turn these into 0s before I worry about this being a 1. So let's make this be a 0 first. So I'm going to align it with row 1 because row 1 has a spot here. It has those 1. So I'm going to take 2 times row 1 and add it to row 3, and then that'll turn that into a 0. So I'm going to write that because I think it helps to know what am I doing here? I'm taking 2 times row 1 and I'm going to add it to row 3. Now the only line that I'm changing is row 3, so I'm going to go ahead and just write the other numbers in there. All right, here we go. 2 times row 1 plus row 3 is going to get me that 0 that I'm shooting for. 2 times row 1, that's 10, plus -1 is 9. Two times 0 is just 0, plus 3 is going to stay 3. And the last one, again, 2 times 0 is 0 plus the row 3. The row 3 is not going to change. So sometimes they're nice for us. All right, let's see what's going to happen there. I've got this to a 0, but I need this one to also be a 0. So what I'm going to use then, since it's the column 2, I'm going to use the row that has a 1 in column 2 with the 0 already there, so I don't mess up the 0 I just got. So I'm working with row 2 now. I'm going to take it times a -9, add it to this row. So I kind of ran out of room out there, so I'm going to come back to the next line and I'm going to say, all right, so -9 times row 2 and add that to row 3, and that's what I'm going to replace my row 3 with. Now, just changing row 3, so let's go ahead and throw in row 1 and row 2. They are not changing. Okay, and this is going to stay 0, and now -9, because that would just all be 0. -9 times 1, that's -9 plus 9. There's the 0 I was shooting for. All right, next, -9 times -5. That's a positive 45. Plus 3. That's a positive 48. Kind of scary. Gets kind of big. That's all right. Because look at this one. This is going to be -9 times 26. No idea what that is. Let's grab a calculator. All right, that's -234. But then I have to subtract 6. So -6 is a -240. Now that seems bad until you get to this next step. Because what I'm wanting is this right here to be a 1. So to make that be a 1, I divide by 48. And I bet this divides nicely by 48. Yep. All right, so I'm going to take row 3 and divide by 48, sorry. Now, before I write that though, I think I'm going to try to kill 2 birds with 1 stone here and also fix this 5, because this is going to make this be a 1, and that's going to be awesome, and I'm going to be done because I'm going to have 0, 0, 1. But remember that we need these to be 0s up here also. So I'm going to work on turning this one into a 0 because it's going to be done with row 2. Row 2 has a 1 here with a 0, so this 0 won't mess that up. I can take this times -5 and add it to row 1, and that'll turn that into a 0. So I'm going to do 2 steps in one here. I'm going to take -5 times row 2 and add it to row 1. All right. we go. I'm going to start with the top one. I'm just going to take row 3 and divide it by 48. So that's going to be 0, 0, 1, negative 5 is what that was when I typed it in my calculator. All right, then we have a 1. Fixing this now. Negative 5 times row 2 plus row 1. That's going to get me the 0 I want. But then what happens on the others? Let's see. Negative 5 times row 2, that's going to be a 25 plus 0. So then that just ends up being 25. Let's try again on the constant. Okay, going to get wormy here. Negative 5 times 26. I'm going to my calculator. All right, and then I have to add 0 to it. Well, that's not too big, so that's a 130 is what that ends up being. All right, and then I didn't change row 2 at all, so it stays the same. All right, so what's left? What do we need to fix? Well, we got the zeros, we got the ones. We want these to all be zeros. So I'm going to work on changing, I don't know, I could do either one of them, I suppose. I'm going to go ahead and do this one. Actually, to be honest, I'm probably going to do them both in one turn because I'm going to use this. It's both of these that I need to turn into zeros. So I'm going to use this row 3 that has a 1, and I'm going to take it times 5 and add it. That'll get rid of this. But then I'm going to also take it times a negative 25 to fix this one. But I'm never really changing it. I'm never going to change that one. I'm just changing the resulting ones. So here's what I've got. To fix row 1, I'm going to take a negative 25 times row 3 and add it to row 1. But notice I wrote row 1 at the end. That's the only thing that changes. Row 3 really stays the same. All right, and then I'm going to also, since row 3 is still the same, I'm going to take a 5 times row 3 and add it to row 2, and that will fix this negative 5 that I have. All right, so for row 1, it's going to stay 1, 0, and then let's look at what happens here. Negative 25 times the 1, so negative 25 plus the 25, that's going to be a 0. So that's what I want. That's going to be the 0. Let's go ahead and fill that in. But that's constant over here I'm going to have to deal with. So negative 25 times negative 5. All right, that's 125. But then I have to add to it the 130. Okay, I thought that seemed weird. I thought that was getting too big, so I went and I paused and I double-checked. And this right here, this is why we put this in. What did I just do? Because I have an error. Did you catch it when I was doing it? Right here, this is supposed to be a negative 130. Right? What I went back and checked is this piece right here. I took negative 5 times row 2, so that was going to be my negative 130. Plus 0, that should have been a negative 130, not a positive 130. So I'm going to fix that and call it a negative. And then, if that's a negative 130, now when I do this, it's going to come out nicer because I'm going to do, let's go back to where I was, sorry for the sidetracking there. So I'm going to take negative 25 times negative 5, so that's the positive 125, with a negative 130. That's just negative 5. That's way better than what I thought I was going to be. Okay, now let's do the second part right here. I'm going to do 5 times row 3 and add row 2. So 5 times 1 is 5. Negative 5, that's to 0. That's what I wanted. So again, nothing really changes until the zeros and the ones are going to stay put, but this is going to become a 0. And then that last piece is going to be 5 times row 3, so 5 times negative 5, that's a negative 25. Add the 26, that's just a 1. All right, that came out all right. All right, so we don't need to do anything to row 3. It stays the same. And look, yeah, I can't write a 0 for some reason. Okay, and look at what we have here. We have ourselves reduced row echelon form. These are 1s, everything else is 0, and this is beautifully set up because the top row tells me what x is equal to. X is going to be -5. The second row tells me what y is going to be. It's going to equal 1. The last row tells me what z is going to equal. Boy, my pen is not working. I apologize. Don't know what's going on. Having a rough time here. And then remember that you write that as an ordered, it's actually called an ordered triple. -5, 1, -5. All right, so you can see that, that's kind of some work there, and no doubt about it. And if you had to deal with all the x's and the y's, it would be even more complex going on there. So this is kind of our way of solving a system. We're not tied to 3 variables. In fact, if you look at your homework, let's do it now. Well, looky there. We have 4 variables. We have an x, a y, a z, a w in there. So now you have 4 equations that you're going to be dealing with. All right, so here's the deal. Here's the moment you've been waiting for. Okay, is she really going to make me do all of this? How am I ever going to get done with my test? Okay, so we are limited. We have a time limit. And so what we've decided sort of as a department is that you kind of need to be able to set these up and do some basic ones, but we're not really going to have the time to be able to do a bunch of these with so many variables. So we have a website for you. Okay, now here's how this is going to work though, because you do have one on your homework that has these 4 variables. What you're going to have to be able to do then is to at least set it up. So looking at this, we always go alphabetically. So we're going to have a column for W, X, Y, Z, and then the number. And we'll put that bar in there. This is kind of the order that we're going to put this. And so we're way back at the beginning. If you would just be able to get it set up and put into an augmented matrix. So in this particular example, I'm going to put in a 4. There is no x, so it's a 0. And then a -2. That's a 2, not a z. And then there is no z, and then the constant is 2. And I'm just doing that with each one of these. I have a 1, and then a -1. There isn't a y, a 5, and then a -22. The third one is a -3 and a -1. Oops, not -1. There is not an x term, so let me get rid of that. A 0, then a -1, then a -1, and then a 10. And row 4 does not have a W. It does have an X. It has a Y. Does not have a Z. Has the constant. This right here is the augmented matrix. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go to this website. So you need to write this website down. You might even want to bookmark it. And what it's going to allow you to do is just type in your augmented matrix, and it goes through the steps for you, and abracadabra, at the end, it tells you what W, X, Y, and Z all equal. It kind of walks you through. It's kind of slick because it shows you the steps of how you would do it. But like I said, we don't have the time on a test to be able to go through all of that. We want to kind of expose you to it so that you're familiar with the matrices. We're going to be limited on testing on it. So you can use this website for your homework. And like I said, for your test, you won't have access to this website. So we'll be limited. You will definitely be able to have to set up an augmented matrix, maybe do a very basic one, just with 2 variables, but we won't get into 3 and the 4 variables for testing purposes. So write down this website. I just made a little bit.ly shortcut to it so that you can find it quickly, and then check it out. You do have to tell it. You first have to tell it how many rows and how many columns. So in this example, I'd say there's 4 rows and 5 columns, and then it pops up, and then you just fill in the numbers from your augmented matrix. All right. Sorry, see, I made you watch it all to get to the end, to the shortcut, but now I'm going to feel like you understand it. And now here's the shortcut. Enjoy.